Picture the most powerful empire in the ancient world, a civilization that built hundreds of pyramids, that unified the entire Nile Valley from the African interior to the Mediterranean Sea, that saved Egypt's own culture from collapse and restored its greatest temples. Now picture who built it, not who you're thinking. This is the story of the Kingdom of Kush, the story of the Black Pharaohs, the most powerful rulers in the ancient world, who the victors spent centuries trying to erase and mostly succeeded. Until now, most people know Egypt. But the story of ancient civilization along the Nile doesn't begin in Egypt. It begins further south, in a region the Egyptians called Kush and we now call Sudan. As far back as 2500 BCE, while Egypt was building the Great Pyramid, Nubia had its own kingdoms, its own kings, its own culture. The Egyptians knew this. They traded with Kush extensively. They fought with Kush repeatedly. They even conquered parts of Kush, extracting gold, ivory, and enslaved people. They called the Nubians the Bow people for their extraordinary archers. Kushite bowmen were considered the best in the ancient world. Egyptian armies hired them. Egyptian texts feared them. But here is what most people don't know. Kush was not simply Egypt's junior neighbor. It was a rival civilization with its own pyramid fields, its own temples, its own royal courts. There are more pyramids in Sudan than in Egypt. Read that again. More pyramids in Sudan than in Egypt. They're just not on the tourist maps. Around 1070 BCE, something significant happened. Egypt began to fracture. The new kingdom, the great era of Ramesses II, of massive temples, of empires started to collapse under its own weight. Regional governors competed for power. The priesthood of Ammonius gained enormous influence, sometimes rivaling the pharaoh. Libyan chieftains controlled the north. The country was fracturing into competing power centers, and while Egypt tore itself apart, Kush was watching, building, consolidating, waiting. The Kushite kings at their capital of Napata had long worshipped the Egyptian god Ammonius. Not because they were copying Egypt, but because Ammonius was originally a Nubian deity. The Egyptians had borrowed him from the south. The Kushites believed Ammonius lived in a sacred mountain at Napata called Jebel Barkal. They believed they were the rightful guardians of his true worship, and they were watching Egypt, the northern half of Ammonius' domain, fall into chaos. A righteous king, they believed, had a duty to act. By the 8th century BCE, Egypt's third intermediate period was in full crisis. The country had split into rival factions. Libyan chieftains controlling the delta in the north. The priests of Ammonius effectively governing Upper Egypt from Thebes. A dozen different regional rulers, each claiming authority. No unified army. No unified trisuri. No single pharaoh commanding real respect. The Egypt of Ramesses II, the empire that had stretched from Sudan to Syria, was a shadow. Egypt needed saving, and it was going to be saved from the south. Around 760 BCE, a Kushite king named Kashta made his move. He extended Kushite influence northward into Upper Egypt. His daughter was installed in Thebes as the god's wife of Ammonius, the highest religious office in Egyptian territory. A Kushite woman, in Egypt's holiest city, performing Egypt's highest religious rituals. It was a masterpiece of political strategy. No armies yet, no conquest yet, just a carefully placed royal daughter securing Kush's claim to the spiritual heart of Egypt before a single sword was drawn. Kashta's son would not be so patient. His name was Piye, also known as Piye, and he is one of the most remarkable military commanders in ancient history. Around 727 BCE, he marched north. He didn't do it for greed. He didn't do it for gold. According to the victory stela he left behind, one of the most detailed ancient military documents ever discovered, Piye marched because he believed Egypt was being dishonored. He believed Ammonius had called him to restore order to the northern kingdom. What followed was a military and political campaign of extraordinary sophistication. Piye didn't just fight, he calculated. He accepted the surrender of city after city, but demanded they be ritually purified before he would enter them. He refused to eat with the Libyan rulers who surrendered to him because they were uncircumcised and ate fish. A conqueror who held elaborate religious standards about who he would dine with. A warrior king who wept when he saw mistreated horses at a captured stable, angrier about the horses than the battlefield dead. He was not a barbarian. He was not a savage from the south, as Egyptian propaganda would later try to frame him. He was a man of extraordinary culture, devotion, and moral complexity. By approximately 716 BCE, after a campaign of several years, Piye controlled all of Egypt, from Mediterranean coast to the fourth cataract of the Nile. He then did something remarkable. He went home, back to Nubia, back to Jebel Barkal and the mountain of Ammonius. He never returned to Egypt again. His mission was done. The land of Ammonius was unified and at peace. He left its administration to others and returned to his homeland. In a world where conquerors typically stayed to rule what they had taken, Piye simply went home. What followed was nearly a century of Kushite rule over Egypt. The Black Pharaohs of the 25th dynasty. Piye, the conqueror. Shabaka, the administrator, who moved the capital to Memphis. Shabaka, who consolidated the dynasty. Taharqa, the greatest of them all. Nubian, the last. Together, they ruled from approximately 747 to 656 BCE, and here is what makes their reign remarkable. They didn't loot Egypt. They didn't plunder it. They didn't rule it as a foreign occupying power. They tried to restore it. Shabaka commissioned the preservation of one of Egypt's oldest creation texts, the Memphite theology, copying it onto what became known as the Shabaka stone. The original papyrus was decaying. Shabaka had it carved into stone, preserving it forever. A Kushite king saved one of Egypt's most important religious documents from being lost. They restored temples, rebuilt monuments, revived religious traditions that had fallen into neglect during the chaos of the Third Intermediate Period. Egyptian art historians describe this era as a renaissance, not a conquest, a restoration. The Kushites came from the south and gave Egypt back its own greatness. Among the Black Pharaohs, one name stands above the rest. Taharqa, pharaoh from 690 to 664 BCE, widely regarded as the most powerful and successful ruler of the entire 25th dynasty. Under Taharqa, the empire reached its maximum extent. Egypt and Nubia unified, trade flowing from the Mediterranean to the African interior. Temples and monuments commissioned across the entire Nile Valley, from Memphis and Karnak in the north to Nubia and Kawa in Nubia. He appears in the Hebrew Bible. In the second book of Kings, when the Assyrian king Sennacherib threatened Jerusalem, King Hezekiah of Judah sent to Egypt for help. Taharqa, that's Taharqa, the man threatening the Assyrian army besieging Jerusalem. A Nubian king from Sudan, mentioned in the Old Testament as the power capable of challenging the greatest military force of the age. That's who Taharqa was. But Taharqa faced a threat that even his power could not ultimately overcome: the Neo-Assyrian Empire, the most fearsome military machine the ancient world had yet produced. Iron weapons, advanced siege technology, ruthless professional armies. In 671 BCE, the Assyrian king Esarhaddon invaded Egypt. Taharqa fought. He was wounded 5 times in battle. He survived. He retreated south to Nubia. He returned to Egypt when Esarhaddon died, and fought again. He was driven south a second time, this time permanently. He died in Nubia in 664 BCE. Never broken, never captured, but Egypt was lost. His pyramid at Nuri, in modern Sudan, is the largest royal pyramid ever built in the Kushite tradition, a monument to a man who gave everything to defend 2 civilizations. 664 BC, Taharqa is dead. His successor, Nubian, attempted one final recapture of Egypt. For a brief period, he retook Thebes. Then the Assyrians returned. Under Ashurbanipal, the Assyrian army sacked Thebes in 663 BCE, one of the greatest cities in the ancient world. Looted, burned, its treasures carried to Mesopotamia. The 25th dynasty was over. The Assyrians installed a new Egyptian ruling family, the Sate dynasty, under their supervision. And then they did something that reveals exactly how much they feared the Black Pharaohs' legacy. They tried to erase them. The Assyrians, and later their Egyptian collaborators, struck the names of the 25th dynasty from monuments across Egypt, chiseled out their cartouches, destroyed their statues, removed their images from temple walls. They didn't just defeat the Black Pharaohs. They tried to make it so no one would ever know they had existed. You don't go to that effort unless you are deeply afraid of someone's legacy. You only erase people who tell a story you can't afford to be told. But the Kingdom of Kush did not end. Not even close. Expelled from Egypt, the Kushite kings returned to Nubia. They moved their capital further south to Meroe, and from Meroe, they ruled for another 1,000 years. The Meroitic period, from roughly 300 BCE to 350 CE, saw Kush develop its own writing system, its own unique art style, its own trade network stretching from sub-Saharan Africa to India and Rome. The Meroe pyramids, over 200 of them stand today as testament to a kingdom that kept building long after Egypt fell to Alexander the Great, long after Egypt became a Roman province. While Caesar ruled Rome, Nubian kings and queens were still sitting on thrones in Meroe, and the queens of Meroe, the Kandakes, deserve their own story entirely. Warrior queens, military commanders. One of them reportedly fought a one-eyed general she called a man worth fighting. The Kingdom of Kush finally ended around 350 CE, not conquered by Europeans, but by the rising Kingdom of Aksum, another great African civilization, which absorbed it into its own empire. There are more pyramids in Sudan than in Egypt. The Black Pharaohs ruled the greatest empire of the ancient world for nearly a century. They saved Egyptian culture, built temples, preserved texts, fought the Assyrian Empire to a standstill, got mentioned in the Bible, and then were systematically erased from the historical record. Their names chiseled from stone. Their contribution buried under centuries of deliberate forgetting. The Sudanese pyramids stand largely unvisited. No major tourist infrastructure. No Hollywood films. No place in your school history textbook. But here is what the erasure could not touch. The stone is still there. The cartouches, even damaged, are still there. The pyramids are still standing. Piye, Taharqa, Shabaka, Shabaka, to Nubian. They left their names in stone. And stone, as it turns out, outlasts every empire that tried to erase it. This is the history they didn't teach you. Follow for more untold stories.